We continue our introduction to the main provisions of the sufficiently general theory of control, having already familiarized ourselves with much. Now we are tackling one of the complex, perhaps the most complex questions, within the sufficiently general theory of control, which is the examination of the processes occurring in supersystems. In our previous sessions, we briefly got acquainted with what supersystems are. That is, super means solid, a super-complex system. And in science, the following definition is given to super-complex systems. It consists of many identical similar elements that have memory. Each little element has memory. Based on this memory, it can self-manage this element. It can transmit information to other elements similar to it, thereby managing these other elements. It can receive information from other elements of the supersystem and, thus, inevitably, react to the information it has received. That is, the other information in relation to this element is information for management, whether we want it or not. Such supersystems, in general, are called that. They are based on computing technology. When it comes to solving many tasks, well, in particular, I have already mentioned it in the context of space exploration. When satellites are flying, the rocket is being prepared. I served at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, and in managing satellites, that is, super complex systems are used. Just imagine a car flying in orbit, so we cannot touch it. Therefore, all this is done using telemetry systems that transmit information about pressure, temperature, and water supply. And if there is a living person in this vehicle, then information about them needs to be processed. You can't steer with your hands, so it has to be controlled using radio commands. Why am I saying this? In principle, all these questions, the processes occurring in supersystems, are defined and formalized in science one way or another. And in principle, it was possible to use the developments that existed in relation to other processes. What other processes? And if we look at people this way, what do we represent? We represent the same supersystem. That is, each person has memory, based on which they somehow self-manage and live. He communicates with other people, transmitting information to other elements, meaning to similar people through voice, books, and his activities. He receives information from others, thus everything affects him through phone, literature, and so on. So, human society is also a kind of supersystem. And regarding what we just discussed about what intelligence is in the previous session, it turns out that similar processes occur in the universe as well. The sun transmits information to the planets, including Earth. And what information? A flare on the sun bang, and people's cardiovascular systems contracted. So the stone heated up, cooled down, heated up, cooled down, bang, it crumbled. These processes, and now imagine, we considered the sun and Earth. But what about the moon, the tides and ebbs on Earth? It attracts water at certain positions of the planets, and so on. Other planets also have an effect. And if you analyze it this way, it turns out that the entire universe is a super-duper complex system. And similar processes also occur in it, meaning information is transmitted, managing other elements of the universe, and so on. Now we will examine how all this is done. For what purpose? We are not considering this just for the sake of it, although it is indeed interesting to discuss the processes occurring in supersystems. However, we will transform everything, meaning we will relate it to human life, because it is possible, necessary, and even essential to consider these questions in relation to the processes occurring in the universe. But since humanity is currently in crisis, what examples should we provide? The best ones are from societal life. And human society is a kind of supersystem that is embedded in other supersystems. This is what we will be talking about. So, what processes occur in relation to us, and what should we do? To live in this super-duper universe within the system, Dignified, happily, how to build your life properly. Therefore, we need to know some basics. We will talk about these basics now. So, we say that the universe as a whole is a kind of super-complex system. It presents itself, the entire universe, as an encompassing supersystem in relation to the multitude of mutually embedded supersystems that exist. And these mutual supersystems, mutual embedding, attempting to illustrate graphically what mutual embedding means. They exist in parallel. That is, if we denote one element of the supersystem with zeros. This is one element, another element, a third, and so on. There are many elements, and another supersystem denotes elements with pluses. Here are plus, 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 and you see they exist together, although they are different supersystems. Here, in the lower picture, several supersystems are drawn. Here, they are already marked with dots. So, here is one supersystem. These are the little red negatives, the blue one is the pluses, this is the second, and here is the third. And when they, you see, mutually enter into each other, they become mutually embedded. This is what is understood by the mutual embedding of supersystems. There can certainly be intelligence in supersystems, and this is what we are talking about. Intelligence is always present when there is a complete control function. That is, we have already talked several times that in a complete control function, if someone is managing something, they must recognize the factors that affect their system, including themselves. If he is managing, then he must develop a management goal, that is, where to lead his object of management, how to achieve the set goal, and so on. And this implies creativity. And creativity can only be achieved through intelligence, since intelligence is the ability to generate new informational modules previously to you, well, uncharacteristic, that is, an element. You didn't know this, but you took it like this, thought about it, and thus formed a new informational module, meaning in order to implement your preconceptions, so to speak, to realize management. Therefore, intelligence is always present where there is a complete control function, and it can be either in the supersystem itself or in the encompassing, hierarchically higher management in relation to the supersystem. And so intelligence can be external in relation to the supersystem. And here we see a fragment. Always further, the pictures will show what they contain. So we will denote the supersystem like this, and here are its little elements, you see, these blue circles. That is, this is the supersystem. Of course, don't think that this is, well, a certain conditional graphic representation to at least visually depict this in some way. But in reality, this is not on a plane, and not even in three-dimensional space, but it is multidimensional, what we discussed with you. And what is a multidimensional matrix? That is, there is a two-dimensional axis of abscissas, and the ordinates are three-dimensional, but we cannot graphically represent the multidimensional one. So this is purely a conditional representation. Don't think that this is actually the case. This supersystem always has the hierarchically highest encompassing control, that is God, who governs everything in the universe. And in relation to this, there is an intelligence that is in some other supersystem. It is external to this supersystem. Here, it could be an internal intelligence. And on this picture, it is depicted that inside this supersystem there is intelligence, and it influences all other elements of the supersystem. That is, it is inside. This means that the elements of the supersystem can possess intelligence themselves. A subset of certain elements of the supersystem can possess intelligence, or individual elements, one or several elements, which have within their structure elements that contain intelligence. That is indeed the basis of intelligence on various elements of the supersystem can be very diverse. Coupled intelligence. What does such coupled intelligence mean? It is the self-management of the supersystem as a whole within the hierarchically higher encompassing management, regardless of its localization in relation to the supersystem. It can be, as we said, external, or it can be internal. Types of supersystems. What supersystems can exist? Well, this applies to the entire universe, and now we will also say in relation to all of humanity. Bone supersystems, from the word bone, are rigid, meaning they exist stably, in a certain balancing mode, as long as their constituent elements exist. That is, this is a bone, rigid supersystem, a supersystem, with a renewable element base. What do you think, is human society on planet Earth bone-like, or does it have a renewable element base? With a renewable base, that is, elements leave for another world, and new ones are renewed. That is, we are a supersystem with a renewable element base. Evolving supersystems. Those whose elements possess a certain reserve of stability and have some potential for development. And let's ask ourselves the question, are we, human society, an evolving supersystem, or a bone-like, rigid one? We are both, with a renewable element base and evolving. Why? Because we have already gone through this. That each element has genetically determined potentials for development, remember. And overall, all these elements, as a whole, as a supersystem now, possess the corresponding potential that it must master in the process of its development. And here we come to a question. What question? Well, when does the development of the supersystem begin? At some point, our supersystem was created as a result of a cascade of mutations. Remember, we talked about when the proto-human appeared, the human that exists now, and he was genetically closed in relation to his ancestral progenitors. That is, now from the perspective of what we are talking about, it turns out that the supersystem, of which we are now representatives, it was introduced into the encompassing supersystem. Well, it probably had some kind of purpose. And the one that existed before it gave rise to the existing supersystem and faded into oblivion. This is, in fact, a serious matter. So what is it about? Why do we live? And what will happen to us as humanity after we realize our developmental potential as intended by God, and we must transition to some new quality, which various teachings speak of? So how will the transition occur? To what other state? But only God knows. And for now we can only guess, predict, suspect, receive revelations and hints from him, and so on. That is, what we have just discussed is what is depicted on this poster you see under the heading Localization is the beginning of the process of realizing developmental potential. That is, when a supersystem appears, there is a certain environment. You see, it is depicted. The environment is under the control of a hierarchically higher encompassing management, and a supersystem is introduced into this environment for certain purposes. That is, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. No. You see, management cannot be aimless in principle. If something is done, it always has a specific purpose. And in the same way, humanity was introduced, to speak in scientific terms, or in layman's terms, people appeared on Earth. That is, it was actually introduced because all processes are managed. So, a supersystem was introduced to achieve certain goals, and this is the time of adaptation. That is, the adjustment of the supersystem to the environment and the realization of its genetic potential, which marks the beginning of the supersystem's functioning. The environment. These are the processes that the supersystem deals with, and these processes have their impact, material, informational, and mixed, on the supersystem. All of this, the impact of the environment on the supersystem, that is, on people, the rains fell, the winds blew. Well, there were also various diseases, animals, everything. That is, the environment acted and people reflected. This is the matter. Therefore, all of this leads to the emergence of characteristics of biological species. And if we talk about supersystems, then what about other animal species? What is a certain supersystem? So, the supersystem, as a whole, its fragments, elements in the universal world. Under this influence, there are two types of localization: spatial localization and informational localization. What is this? An example of spatial localization. This is just an example. Here is another image of spatial localization. After all, what are we talking about? That space and time are subjective characteristics brought by humans. That is, an example of such spatial localization is subjectivism. So, in assessment, this is a private measure that can be used to measure certain parameters. So, an example of spatial localization is the heliocentric model of the solar system. Here it is drawn, the sun, around which the planets revolve. This is a certain supersystem, the heliocentric model, meaning a fragment of the universe. It exists under the influence of some medium, that is, within the bounds of a certain galaxy. The galaxy, then, is still within this encompassing system. And so we reach the influence of the hierarchically highest encompassing control, that is, the entire universe, which is God, and governs all processes possessing intelligence within the subordinate universe. So, this is an example of spatial localization, and informational localization can have different characteristics. I will give you an example that one and the same information can be placed in the preface of a book in particular. An information about the book, yes, can be placed in the afterword. I also place this information, and it can be scattered throughout the entire book, in notes, appendices, and so on. Here are examples of informational localization. In the interaction of the medium and the supersystem, well, here is the familiar picture again. There is a supersystem, and there are its elements, many, many. The entire supersystem is subjected to the influence of the medium, that is, the encompassing system, and all this is within the hierarchically highest encompassing control. For each of the elements of this supersystem, the entire supersystem is a part of the medium. That is, we take this little element, and this little element acts on it, and this little element, and rain falls on it. If I am sitting in front of you, I am an element of the supersystem, but other elements act on me, bosses, subordinates, relatives, acquaintances. They do act, right? The encompassing system acts on me. Rain falls, snow, cold, heat. That is, all of this has an effect. That is, in relation to me, as an element of the supersystem is a dominating factor, encompassing me. Well, what the classics said, you cannot live in society and be free from society. Therefore, even from such scientifically grounded views, quite specific conclusions follow for those who want to be. And I am outside of politics, and I will manage on my own. They will find you, even in the forest. Father Vissarion, he went into the forest. He led his flock and said, civilization is perishing. When it perishes, we will come out of the forest and start building a new life. But even there, the tax inspector finds him, which means his flock has sued him because he was collecting money from them. How they sold apartments in St. Petersburg to get to the city of the sun, they made contributions to him, and then he says, we didn't get along in character. He says, but I have no money, they say, give it back. So, you can't hide anywhere. Therefore, it is important to understand that the entire environment affects every element of the supersystem. One can also reflect on global politics, both internal and external. Remember what we discussed, particularly in the introductory lecture, when we talked. In other words, nothing will come of it. But all elements, they are autonomous, generally speaking. So, regarding the material carrier, I am a material carrier. Regarding the information provision, that is, I possess such information. Others possess different information. We have different levels of understanding, but all elements are, in one way or another, connected to the supersystem as a whole. Therefore, the supersystem as a whole is also autonomous to some extent in relation to the environment, but the environment exerts its pressure on it. But in relation to the environment, the supersystem can be. And here are three options. The first option, the supersystem, is not closed in relation to the environment. That is, the environment does not exert any influence on it. The environment tries, but it cannot do anything. The supersystem self-governs within the hierarchically highest encompassing management. The second option can sustain its existence at the expense of the environment's resources. That is, you see another picture. There is a supersystem, and the environment exerts its influence and feeds the supersystem with its resources. And the third option can be a mutual exchange with the environment, meaning the environment exerts its influence, but the supersystem also influences the environment. Let's apply this to human society. Here, we are the supersystem. What is the environment for us? The planet, the earth, that is, rains, winds, forests, seas, and so on. Can we exist in isolation without the environment? No. So the first option does not apply to us. The second option does. Therefore, the environment nourishes us with resources. That is, with rains, water, and so on, with food products, bananas, and all other things. Here, but what about us? We intervene in the environment. We give, we interfere, that is, we act, we influence the environment. So there is an exchange with the environment. Now let's put it this way, and the biosystem, the biosphere of planet Earth, is it nourished, or is it autonomous in relation to the environment, or is it nourished? Does the surrounding heliocentric model, all these planets, not influence it? They do influence it, because the rays of the sun shine, so to speak, solar flares, and they cause droughts, or other phenomena, so various things happen day and night. It's cold, hot, that is, the environment intervenes. It exerts influence through its resources. Does the Earth influence or not influence its surrounding environment? Well, it is obvious that it does influence, including, so to speak, in the movement of planets. You know, the moon is held by the planet, Earth, and its oscillations, how it spins, are affected by Earth's gravity. The same goes for the Earth influencing the sun, as well as other planets. And in the formation of that plasma component, which, so to speak, determines the behavior of the sun, the Earth also exerts its influence along with other planets on solar flares and other phenomena. That's why for us, this third variant of the interaction of the system and supersystem with the environment is characteristic. Now let's consider the informational support of the elements of the supersystem. Well, before we start, I understand that there is a certain course going on now, and for those watching these lectures. Of course, everything may not immediately fit into their heads, especially for older people, because the youth take it all in like a blank sheet of paper. That is, I have lectured to students of the International Commercial University, and when you tell them the world consists of three parts, they write down after you: matter, information, and the world. But older people might think, what is this guy saying? I wasn't taught this. They compare it to information being loaded not into a void. I say this to emphasize that in order to understand everything correctly now, we need to remember and keep in mind everything we have already studied before. So, broadly speaking, what key things should we keep in mind? That the world is a unified whole and all processes within it are oscillatory and represent an inseparable triadic process. Matter. Matter transforms as it develops. Here is the formula, that is the three unities. Matter or information measure. There is no formless matter, and each matter is endowed with a measure. Thus the information it possesses is endowed with a measure. There is no thing without a form. Allah created everything and measured it with a measure. Here are 3 building blocks that you should always remember. And what else should you remember? That all processes are manageable. There are no unmanageable processes. There are managed processes and self-managing processes. But even to enter the mode of self-management, it must be organized. This is the process of self-management. Therefore, to those who think that they are acting independently, no, all of this is within the framework of a certain management hierarchy. Thus, about the transmission of information. And what does information mean? Oscillatory processes all carry some information, endowed with a certain numerical quantitative measure, the sound of oscillations, the light of oscillations, and so on. Therefore, it is very important that we discuss these moments not just for the sake of reasoning. And now the task is set for the informational support of the elements of the supersystem. What does informational support mean? And we need to remember that information is inseparable from matter, from a material carrier, because information cannot be abstract. It always resides on a material carrier, and information is always measured. The word is a code, a measure. A letter is also a measure. Thus, any processes, such as oscillatory ones, are endowed with a measure. So, either there is some constant frequency, which is also a measure. If there is some code in the frequency, then that is also a measure. Therefore, when I seem to be talking about the informational support of the elements of the supersystem, you should remember everything I just said. That this is a trinity process. That the transmission of information is always management. Information is transmitted using a material carrier. Information is endowed with measures and so on. Thus, the transmission of information changes the state of another fragment and so on. This is such a scheme. It should always be with a person. This is exactly what the ancient Egyptian priesthood deprived us of. Remember, these 2 little pyramids, everything I am telling you, they did not give us. What did they give? From here. Everyone knows their own lyric, physics, and that's it. But they did not provide such a holistic understanding. For what? To deceive us. That's all. That is, to manipulate consciousness, and thereby control.